Full story. How Sophia reclaimed her life and found true love. Sophia had always been the financial pillar for her family, offering her support without hesitation. Despite having a stable job and a comfortable life, she felt taken for granted. It wasn't until she uncovered the betrayal of her own family, especially her mother and sister, that she decided enough was enough. After learning that they had been secretly taking money from her account, Sophia took action, contacting a lawyer and starting an investigation. This powerful journey of self-discovery, justice, and standing up for herself eventually led her to find peace and happiness with her supportive fiancé, Ryan. Their small wedding marked the beginning of a new chapter, where Sophia learned that true strength lies in setting boundaries and not allowing those who don't appreciate her to control her life. If you enjoyed Sophia's story, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to Silent Wars for more inspiring content. My name is Sophia, and I'm 34 years old. I live in the beautiful city of San Diego, California, where I work as a financial manager at a rapidly growing tech startup. From the outside, my life might look like a picture of success, an established career, a steady income, the freedom to travel whenever I please, and no children holding me back. I seem to have it all together. The reality, however, is far from what most people imagine. What they don't see is the constant weight I carry. For years, I've been the person my family turns to when they need help. I've always been the fixer, the one who steps in to solve problems and pick up the pieces when things fall apart. When a family member needs money for something, I'm the first to offer a loan. When there's a big event or an emergency, I'm the one who provides the financial support. It's not that I mind, it's what I've always done. I've never hesitated to help out. But it's taken a toll on me in ways that are hard to describe. Growing up, I was taught that family always comes first, and that sacrifice is a natural part of love. I believed that providing for my loved ones was the right thing to do. But what no one sees, what no one understands, is the emotional and mental weight that comes with this role. When you're constantly the person giving, it's easy to forget that you too have needs that go unmet because you're always looking out for others. There have been countless times I've said yes when I should have said no. I've made sacrifices putting off my own dreams, deferring my personal goals, simply because my family needed me. And while I never expected anything in return, it's hard not to feel invisible. It's hard not to wonder when it will be my turn to be cared for, to be supported, to have someone stand by me as I've done for them. What people don't see is the silent burden I carry, the exhaustion that creeps in every time I take on another responsibility. They see the success, the travel photos, the career achievements, but they don't see the constant pressure I live with, acting as the emotional and financial backbone of my family. I never imagined that the people I loved most, the ones I had always supported without question, would be the ones to betray me. It all started on a warm weekend in June when my younger brother Ethan tied the knot with his beautiful bride, Maya. The wedding was set in a stunning beachside venue in Santa Barbara. The soft waves lapped gently at the shore, the sky was a perfect blue, and twinkling lights were strung up on palm trees, creating an atmosphere that could have come straight out of a fairy tale. It was the kind of wedding you only see in movies, a picture-perfect day where everything seemed to align. But behind the picture-perfect scenes, there was something no one knew. While the guests were admiring the scenery and enjoying the celebration, I was quietly shouldering the financial burden. Ethan and Maya were in the early stages of their life together, fresh off paying off student loans. My parents, both retired, lived on a fixed income and were not in a position to contribute. So, I stepped in, just like I always did. I paid for the venue, the catering, the flowers, and even the photographer. Every detail of the wedding, from the grand to the small, had been made possible because of me. At first, I didn't mind. After all, I loved my family, and supporting them felt natural. This was a celebration of Ethan and Maya's new life together, and I was more than happy to help make it happen. But what I didn't expect, what no one could have predicted, was how invisible I would feel once the celebration ended. Ethan and Maya were showered with praise and congratulations. People talked about how amazing the wedding was, about how beautiful everything looked, about how perfect the day had been. Yet, no one mentioned the one person who had made it all possible: me. The sting didn't hit me immediately, but it did hit me. Deep down, I realized something that I hadn't truly allowed myself to acknowledge before. It wasn't just the money, it was the lack of recognition. I was left feeling like I was just the background figure in a story where I had given everything, yet received nothing in return. The wedding was a dream, yes, but I couldn't help but wonder if it had all been a dream for everyone else except me. As the evening unfolded, the atmosphere was filled with laughter, joy, and heartfelt congratulations. Ethan and Maya were the center of attention, and rightfully so. It was their special day, and they were the ones everyone had come to celebrate. Guests admired the beautiful decorations, the flawless ceremony, and the dreamy setting. People spoke in glowing terms about how perfect everything was, from the music to the cake to the stunning views of the beach. It was, without a doubt, a magical event. But as the night went on, something started to eat at me. It wasn't a loud or obvious feeling, it was quiet, sneaky, like a shadow following me around the venue. No one mentioned my name, not once. It was as if I was invisible, standing in the background of my own contribution. For a moment, I told myself it didn't matter. After all, this was family. I had helped because I wanted to, not because I expected anything in return. I reassured myself that it wasn't about recognition, it was about love and support. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. I had spent months preparing for this moment, saving up money, sacrificing my own time and energy to make sure the day would be everything Ethan and Maya had dreamed of. I didn't mind doing it, it's what family does. But when the praise flowed so freely to everyone but me, I felt a sharp sting. The kind of sting that comes when you've given everything, yet it's as though your efforts never existed. As the night wound down and guests began to head home, Ethan came up to me and gave me a hug. "Thanks for everything, Liv. You really came through," he said, his voice warm but casual. And for a moment, I smiled, squeezed his hand, and told him it was no problem. But in that moment, I felt an ache in my chest. It wasn't about being thanked, it was about being seen. The wedding was beautiful, yes, but as I watched everyone else bask in the glory of the event, I couldn't shake the feeling that somehow I had become just a footnote in the story I had helped create. The wedding wasn't mine to enjoy, it had never been. It was theirs, and I was just a silent contributor in the background, lost in the shadows. The wedding was over, and Ryan and I were both exhausted but content as we made our way back to the hotel. The night had been a whirlwind of laughter, dancing, and family celebrations. We spent hours reminiscing about the ceremony, the smiles on Ethan and Maya's faces, and the joy of seeing everyone come together to mark such a special occasion. It had been a perfect night, and for a brief moment, everything felt right. The next morning, however, everything changed in an instant. The soft hum of the hotel lobby, the smell of fresh coffee, and the chatter of other guests seemed distant as I checked my phone while waiting for Ryan to finish packing. I opened my banking app out of habit, just to check in on things. What I saw made my stomach drop. My bank account was no longer what I thought it should be. $22,000 was gone, vanished. At first, I thought I had misread the screen. I blinked several times, trying to focus. But no, it was still there. The large amount was missing, and the numbers on my account seemed off. My heart raced as I stared at the screen, my hands trembling uncontrollably. I felt a lump form in my throat, and for a moment, the room around me seemed to blur. "Ryan, something's wrong," I whispered, my voice shaking. He looked up, sensing the panic in my tone, and walked over to me. Without a word, I handed him my phone. As he scrolled through the app, the reality of what had happened began to settle in. "Did you make any large transfers recently?" he asked, his voice calm but his brow furrowing. I shook my head. I hadn't. I hadn't made any big purchases, hadn't spent any significant amounts in the last week. I watched as Ryan tapped through the transaction history, his jaw tightening with every swipe. The screen flickered as he revealed 3 large transfers made at 10:47 p.m., the night before: $6,000 to Jenna Collins, $7,000 to Scott Collins, and another $6,000 to Marcia Green. My breath caught in my throat. That was the same time I had been in the shower, completely unaware. "Someone used your phone," Ryan said, his voice flat. There was no uncertainty in his tone, he knew it, and so did I. Someone close to me had taken my money. And just like that, the comfortable world I had built around me shattered. My heart raced in my chest as I stood there, my hands still trembling from what I had just discovered. I already knew who had taken the money. The pieces all fell into place with horrifying clarity. It wasn't just some random theft, it was betrayal, and it was close to home. The person I had trusted the most, the person I had always leaned on, had taken something from me. My own mother. Without a second thought, I picked up the phone and dialed her number. As the call connected, I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I had to know the truth, and I had to hear it from her. I didn't have any more questions, I already knew what had happened. But I needed to hear her response. I needed her to admit it. "Mom, I need to ask you something," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, trembling with the weight of what was to come. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and I could hear her moving around, maybe doing dishes or chatting with someone in the background. Her tone was casual, almost cheerful, as if nothing had happened. "Morning, honey. Everything okay?" she asked, her voice laced with that familiar warmth that I had always relied on. It felt so wrong to hear her speak like everything was fine. I could barely hold it together as I asked, "3 large transfers were made from my bank account last night to you, Jenna and Scott. Do you know anything about that?" I waited for a response, and what came next was nothing short of a slap in the face. "Oh, that?" she said, almost laughing. "I thought it was for the wedding gift." She laughed again, the sound of it grating against my ears. She made it sound so innocent, like she hadn't just taken $22,000 from me, like it was no big deal, as if it was all just some harmless misunderstanding. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It wasn't a gift. It was theft. Blatant theft. They had used my phone, had used my trust, and stolen from me without a second thought. No permission. No remorse. No apology. I wanted to scream, to shout at her, but instead I just stood there, frozen, trying to process the reality of what she had done. And in that moment, I knew. This wasn't just a mistake, this was deliberate. This was betrayal at its core. I was livid. Every nerve in my body was burning with anger as Ryan and I drove to my mother's house. The quiet hum of the car only made the rage boiling inside me more palpable. I couldn't believe this was happening. I had given everything to my family: time, money, trust, and now they had taken from me in the worst way. I was furious, not just because they had stolen from me, but because they had betrayed the very core of what it means to be family. When we arrived at the house, Jenna was sitting in the kitchen, casually sipping her coffee like everything was normal. She looked up at us as if nothing had happened. She didn't even flinch when I walked through the door. as if the $22,000 she had taken from me was just a casual favor, a minor transaction. The audacity of it hit me like a wave. I couldn't even make myself look at her. I walked straight past Jenna and into the living room, where my mother and Scott, my brother-in-law, were lounging comfortably on the couch, chatting as if they hadn't just destroyed everything I thought we had. I felt my heart pounding in my chest as I stood there for a moment, trying to hold it together. But I couldn't. The weight of what they had done, the deceit, the coldness of it all, overwhelmed me. I took a step forward, my fists clenched at my sides, and I demanded, "I want to know who gave you the right to take my money without asking." My voice shook with a mix of anger and hurt, but I didn't care. I needed answers. I needed to hear them admit what they had done. For a moment there was silence. Jenna, who had been so casual just a minute ago, now looked up at me, her face unreadable. Scott didn't even have the decency to look embarrassed. And then my mother, sitting there with a cup of tea in her hand, looked up at me with that same cold expression I'd seen all too many times before. There was no apology, no remorse, only deflection, only justification. I felt like I was suffocating, standing there in front of them. My world was spinning. How could they do this? How could the people I loved and trusted the most betray me like this? I stood there, frozen, staring at Jenna as she sat on the couch, casually sipping her coffee. The casualness of it all, the indifference in her eyes, hit me like a slap to the face. It was almost as if I wasn't standing there, confronting her for stealing from me. Her response was so casual, so dismissive, that it took me a moment to process it. "Your password was too easy." She shrugged nonchalantly, as if that explained everything. "We just borrowed what we needed." She said it with a smirk, like she had done nothing wrong, like it was just a small favor, a trivial thing. It wasn't theft. It wasn't betrayal. It was simply her borrowing from me. Scott, my brother-in-law, chuckled from the background, clearly unfazed by the situation. "It's not like you're struggling. We just needed a little help," he added, as if that somehow made everything okay. As if it was fine for them to take thousands of dollars from me because, in their eyes, I didn't really need it. I was doing well, so what was the harm? I felt my stomach churn, the bile rising in my throat. This wasn't just about the money. It was about something much deeper, something more insidious than I had ever imagined. The betrayal, the manipulation, it wasn't just financial. It was emotional. They had stripped away my dignity, treating me like nothing more than an ATM they could tap into whenever it was convenient for them. The words echoed in my head. We just needed a little help. But they hadn't asked. They hadn't even thought to check if I could afford to give. They had just taken. Taken without permission, without care, and certainly without any sense of respect. The money had never been the issue. What hurt was the realization that my own family saw me as a resource, someone who existed to serve their needs, to bail them out when they couldn't be bothered to help themselves. The worst part was that this wasn't the first time. I had been there for them time and time again, and each time they'd taken more, without so much as a second thought. But now, in this moment, I saw them for who they truly were, and it felt like the ground beneath me was slipping away. As I stood there, my heart still pounding with fury and disbelief, my mother remained eerily calm. She seemed so composed, as if the situation we were facing wasn't as severe as it was. "You're fine, Sophia," she said in a soft, almost soothing voice. "We're family. You should be helping us." The words stung, but it was the way she said them so casually, so dismissively, that hit me the hardest. I had always believed that family was about love, trust, and mutual support. Yet here she was, trying to minimize everything, turning my feelings into something trivial. "You should be helping us." That was her justification. Not a single acknowledgement of the hurt, the betrayal, the theft. It wasn't about being helped. It wasn't even about the money anymore. It was about being seen, being respected, and treated with decency. But then, something happened that shattered what little was left of the fragile bond I had with her. In the heat of the moment, Marcia slapped me across the face. The sound of her hand connecting with my skin rang in my ears long after it happened. My face burned, but what hurt more was the cold realization that this wasn't just about financial theft anymore. It was assault. In that moment, something inside me snapped. I had spent so many years forgiving, understanding, making excuses for their behavior. But this was crossing a line I could never come back from. It wasn't just a betrayal of my trust, it was a complete disrespect of who I was as a person. Before I could even process what had just happened, Ryan stepped in. His protective instincts flared, his anger rising like a storm. He moved between me and my mother, his voice calm but full of authority. "Touch her again and you'll deal with the police," he warned, his words sharp and final. The room fell silent. I stood there, still reeling from the slap, but a small part of me felt a sense of relief. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't alone in this. Ryan had my back. And in that moment, I realized that I didn't need to tolerate this anymore. The line had been crossed, and I was no longer going to pretend that everything was okay. That night, as I sat there in silence, everything I had been avoiding for years hit me all at once. It wasn't just the money I had given. It wasn't even the slap that stung on my cheek. It was the realization that I had been enabling them all along. For far too long, I had convinced myself that I was helping my family, that I was being supportive, generous, loving. But in reality, I wasn't helping. I was being used, manipulated, and discarded the moment they no longer had a need for me. The truth was brutal, but it was the truth. Every time I said yes to their requests, every time I bailed them out, every time I gave and gave without hesitation, I had allowed this to happen. I had let them treat me like a safety net, something to fall back on when they needed it, but never something to respect. They had taken from me, not once but countless times, without ever thinking twice about what it was doing to me. And I had let them. It was a wake-up call, a slap in the face that wasn't physical, but just as painful. I had been so blinded by my desire to be the family helper, the one they could rely on, that I hadn't seen the toll it was taking on me. The more I gave, the more they took. And the more they took, the more invisible I became. The next morning, after a restless night of thinking, I knew what I had to do. I had made a decision. I wasn't going to let this continue. I wasn't going to be a doormat anymore. I gathered every financial transaction I had made for my family over the past 3 years. Every loan, every gift, every emergency assistance. $50,000, that was the total. $50,000 of unreturned loans. $50,000 spent on helping them, bailing them out, making their lives easier. And what did I have in return? Nothing. No gratitude, no respect, no acknowledgement. Just the cold reality that they had taken it all without a second thought. As I looked at the pile of statements, the numbers seemed to blur together. But what stood out wasn't just the amount. It was the truth I had been enabling them, and that was something I could no longer ignore. It was time to draw the line. Once the decision was made, there was no turning back. I had spent far too long being the silent victim, carrying the weight of my family's actions without ever speaking up. But now, it was different. The line had been drawn, and I wasn't going to back down. The betrayal was clear, and I knew that it was time to hold my family accountable for what they had done. I immediately contacted a lawyer, someone I trusted, and explained everything: the theft, the manipulation, and the constant exploitation of my generosity. It was the first step in what would turn out to be a long, painful process, but I was ready. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of clarity and determination. I wasn't alone in this anymore. Soon enough, a case was filed, and the police launched an investigation into my family's actions. They took the situation seriously, combing through all the details. The unauthorized transfers were traced, each one marked with the time and date they occurred, transfers made while I was vulnerable, when I had trusted them without question. They dug into phone records, pulling up conversations and texts that clearly showed how my family had plotted and manipulated me into this situation. It became obvious that this wasn't just a one-time mistake, it was a pattern. As the investigation continued, the full extent of the betrayal started to unfold. My family had stolen from me, used me for their own gain, and manipulated my trust over and over again. The truth was undeniable. The evidence was there, clear as day. Every document, every conversation, every record pointed to one thing. They had taken what wasn't theirs, and they had done it with full knowledge of what they were doing. It was surreal to see everything laid out in front of me, to know that the very people I had loved and trusted had taken advantage of me in such a cold, calculated way. But as painful as it was, I also felt a sense of relief. For the first time, I wasn't the one carrying the burden of this secret. I wasn't alone in this fight. The truth was coming to light, and justice was finally within reach. Months had passed since the investigation began, but the weight of everything that had happened still felt as heavy as the day I made the decision to report my family. The days leading up to the court hearing were filled with uncertainty, but also a sense of purpose. For so long, I had allowed myself to be controlled by guilt and manipulation, but now it was time for accountability. The courtroom felt colder than I expected, the sterile walls echoing the tension that hung in the air. Jenna and Scott were seated across from me, their faces guarded but their body language stiff with the knowledge that their actions were about to have consequences. My mother, the woman I had trusted above all, sat beside them, her eyes avoiding mine as the reality of her betrayal set in. I had once believed that blood was thicker than water, that family would always be there. But now, I could see it clearly. What I had seen as love was nothing more than a manipulation of my generosity and trust. The judge entered, and the room fell silent. I had already made peace with the fact that the pain they had caused me would never go away, but this was the moment of reckoning. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about getting back at them for what they had done. It was about holding them accountable for their actions, for the financial exploitation they had subjected me to, for the assault my mother had inflicted on me, and for the emotional toll I had carried for so long. The judge's voice rang out as she handed down the sentences. Jenna and Scott were charged with financial exploitation and theft, ordered to repay the money they had stolen from me, and sentenced to 3 years of supervised probation. But that wasn't all. A restraining order was placed against them, prohibiting any contact with me, a measure that would keep them out of my life for good. My mother, who had played a role in the theft and the assault, was sentenced to mandatory anger management counseling and a suspended jail term. As the judge spoke, I could feel a sense of closure settling in. It wasn't about making them pay for the pain they had caused me. It was about moving forward and knowing that I had taken the necessary steps to protect myself. They had to be held responsible. And for once, I felt like I was finally free. In the aftermath of everything, I finally found the peace I had been searching for. The weight I had carried for years of guilt, of fear, of silence, was gone. For the first time, I truly understood that family doesn't have the right to hurt you, manipulate you, or take advantage of your kindness. I had spent so much of my life believing that family was supposed to be unconditional, that love meant always giving, always sacrificing, no matter what it cost me. But now I saw things clearly. True love doesn't involve losing yourself in the process. When I drew that line, when I made the decision to take action and hold them accountable, I didn't just protect my finances or my dignity. I protected my mental and emotional well-being, which had been so compromised by the toxic relationships I had been holding on to for far too long. The truth, no matter how painful, had finally set me free. Jenna and Scott's lives, on the other hand, unraveled in the aftermath. Their joint accounts were frozen, their jobs lost, and their reputation was tarnished beyond repair. They had thought they could take from me without consequences, that I would never have the strength to stand up for myself. But life has a way of catching up with those who exploit others without remorse. They were left to deal with the mess they had created not just for themselves, but for everyone they had harmed along the way. But for me, the biggest change wasn't about their downfall, it was about what I had gained. The biggest transformation came from within. I had learned to let go of the toxic relationships that were holding me back. I had stopped being the one who always gave, always sacrificed, and always bent to others' will. I had found the courage to choose peace over sacrifice, to choose my own happiness and health over the constant need to please others. In the end, it wasn't about the punishment they faced. It wasn't about their consequences. It was about me taking back my power, and for the first time, I felt like I had control over my life again. And that, I realized, was the greatest gift I could give myself. Months passed, and slowly, things began to settle. I tried to put the ordeal behind me, but the echoes of it continued to resonate. What surprised me most was how many people had heard my story, and how deeply it had impacted them. I had never imagined that sharing my pain, my vulnerability, would lead to so many others finding their voice too. I never expected to become a symbol of strength for others, but that's exactly what happened. One afternoon, I opened my inbox to find a message from a man I didn't know. He had read my story, and it had struck a chord with him. "I finally stopped sending money to my adult children who have been using me," he wrote. "Your story gave me the courage to say no." I stared at the screen, reading his words over and over again. He had been in the same position I once was, constantly giving, constantly sacrificing, and never asking for anything in return. And my story, my decision to stop enabling my family's behavior, had given him the courage to stand up for himself. It hit me that my experience wasn't isolated, it was a shared struggle, something many people silently endured. Soon after, I began receiving more messages, women and men alike, sharing their own experiences of emotional exploitation and financial manipulation. Many of them had been in relationships or families where their kindness was taken advantage of, where they were expected to give without ever receiving anything in return. They, too, had been afraid to speak up, afraid to set boundaries, just like I had once been. But my journey gave them the courage to stop, to say no, to draw their own lines in the sand. The more I read these messages, the more I realized the power of speaking out. My decision to stand up for myself had rippled out, inspiring others to do the same. And that realization, that my pain had led to something bigger than me, something that helped others regain control of their lives, was nothing short of healing. It wasn't just about my own healing anymore. It was about creating a community of strength, where no one had to feel alone in their struggle, where people could find the courage to protect themselves just as I had done. And in that, I found peace. Through everything that had happened, one constant remained by my side: Ryan. When everything around me was falling apart, when I was questioning who I could trust, he was the one who stood firm, unwavering. He never pushed me to forgive. He never tried to rush me through my healing process. Instead, he gave me the space to grieve, to reflect, and to figure out what I truly needed. His quiet support was a lifeline, a steady hand that helped me find my way through the storm. For so long, I had been caught in a cycle of guilt and obligation, convinced that forgiveness was something I needed to give for the sake of family. But with Ryan's support, I realized something profound. Forgiveness wasn't about excusing their behavior or letting them back into my life. It was about reclaiming my own peace, about setting boundaries that would protect me from further harm. As the months passed, I began to see my life differently. The weight of the past started to lift, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe freely again. It was then that I made a decision, one that surprised even me. I had always thought I wasn't ready, that I needed to focus on healing and rebuilding before making such a huge commitment. But in the end, it wasn't the past that needed healing. It was my belief that I had to go through life alone. I agreed to marry Ryan. In that moment, I knew I was making the right choice, not because it was what anyone else expected, but because it was what I wanted. In a small ceremony, surrounded by the people who had always been there for me, the ones who truly loved and appreciated me, I realized something important. I hadn't lost my family. I had simply stopped enabling those who would never appreciate me. The people who truly mattered, the ones who stood by me through the pain, were the ones I had found a new sense of family with. And as I stood there, holding Ryan's hand, I understood that the true meaning of family wasn't about blood or obligation. It was about love, respect, and the willingness to support each other without expecting anything in return. Life teaches us that true love and family aren't about constant sacrifice, especially when it leads to feeling unseen or unappreciated. As we grow older, we may find ourselves giving more to others, our children, relatives, or friends, out of a sense of duty or love. However, the lesson that often gets overlooked is that love should not come at the expense of our own well-being. Setting healthy boundaries is not a form of selfishness. It's a way to protect ourselves from being taken advantage of. We must learn to respect our own needs and understand that helping others doesn't mean losing ourselves in the process. As the years pass, it's vital to realize that true family is not about who demands the most, but about those who cherish and respect you for who you are. It's never too late to reclaim your peace and take control of your life by choosing to let go of toxic relationships that no longer serve you. You don't need to bear the weight of guilt or obligation. Instead, find strength in knowing that saying no doesn't diminish your love, it protects your heart. By choosing yourself and setting boundaries, you allow space for true connections to flourish. And remember, your worth isn't measured by how much you give, but by how much you honor your own needs and heart. Thank you for watching Sophia's journey. If her story inspired you, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to Silent Wars for more heartfelt stories. Stay tuned for more empowering content.